We're back, and it's broadband industry panel, and for ad valorem tax implications. You know, we've talked a lot about investment, direction, technology of broadband, and now we have representatives from the providers are actually discussed by Jeff in the last session, and had one who did double duty. And I'll introduce again Gary Hunter from AT&T, John Reed from Charter, and Christian Altenburger from Comcast. And again, we're going to focus more directly here on really all of these things that have been talked about today, and they're going to, some of it may be semi-repetitive on investment, direction, technology again, but thinking in terms of what this conference is largely about are those valuation implications, specifically valuation for ad valorem tax services, which has its own unique component with a fixed, typically cost-driven model, and trying to apply that to highly dynamic industry and rapid technological advance is a challenge, and that's why we're happy to see many people from industry and the assessment community here, and we hope to give you some things to think about. But before we do that, we're going to do a little trivia. Question one, and also we've got gift cards from Starbucks as usual, but there's something that was talked about earlier that there are several of you in this room old enough to remember, and it's called inflation. So instead of the gift cards being $25 this year, they're going to be $35. So here we go. This is the first week of the Lunar New Year. Okay? And this is the year of the... Who said rabbit back here first? I heard it from this gentleman first. Yep. Listening well. All right. Okay. Now. Okay, we're down to AFC and NFC finals in NFL football now. 4 teams left. We've got from the AFC, Kansas City Chiefs, Cincinnati Bengals. From the NFC, we have the San Francisco 49ers and Philadelphia Eagles. All of these teams have participated in Super Bowls in the past. Second question is, what is the cumulative, all of them added together, cumulative total Super Bowl wins by these 4 teams over time? How?
4, 7, 8.
Who said 8?
12.
It's 8. John, you got it. 49ers have 5. Chiefs have 2. Eagles have 1. And Jim, I'm sorry, as you well know, the Bengals have none. Yep. Just trying to help out. Third question. So I think you're all aware we're in Texas. In fact, you come in Texas, you're made aware by everything you see and every person that you're in Texas, right? So it hits you as soon as you get here. And so a little Texas history, and I think all of you also know that you're in Austin, and that's the capital of Texas. But Texas became a state of the United States of America. I know some here don't think that's fake news or something, but since 1845. And Texas became a state the same year as another state. Name the other state that joined the Union in 1845. No. No. You're close, but 5 years off. Nope, we're way off. Nope.
Louisiana?
Nope. I'll open it up to these guys. You're running out of states. Okay, I'm gonna give a hint. This state shares latitudes. I didn't say attitudes. I said latitudes, or I'm not going to touch the attitude thing, but it shares latitude. They share many latitudes. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. 1845. Okay, there you go. There you go. Had to give the hint. And we were talking about Austin earlier. And one thing that struck me, and there's the latitude similarity. Again, I'm not going to say attitudes, but because nothing's ever 100%. But it is interesting that last week or week before, the governor of Florida was celebrating his second term. He gave his inauguration speech, and he talked about Florida being the place where woke goes to die. And I thought about that, and Texas, but we're in Austin, and I think that's the place where woke comes to get high. And you don't get to just step out and take a deep breath in any corner. So we'll move on. Gary's going to talk about AT&T some, and again, in addition to kind of current status circumstances, what are the important valuation issues that he deals with in his responsibilities. Gary?
So as Jeff pointed out, we're going to touch upon some of the same things that we've talked about all today related to fiber and broadband. We're certainly at a point with fiber right now. Fiber is where you're going with all the broadband, whether it's the telcos and certainly cables moving that direction, and AT&T is no different. Fiber, besides being from a, they say it's technology proof. Whether you can get to 1 gigabit, 5 gigabit, 10 gigabit, 100 gigabit. I think fiber itself is conducive to that. It's just the electronics and where we go with that. Certainly lower operating costs. Fiber is a passive network compared to copper. So the lower operating costs drive benefits, cheaper capital cost. You certainly don't have a lot of splicing and a lot of the shorter terminals. And certainly today, with everything going to video and broadband and some of the things with the higher video or higher speed products, fiber is certainly much superior than some of the other products. I don't know if you can read this, but we touched upon in terms of broadband and market share, cable still dominates, but fiber has made a lot of inroads over the last 4 or 5 years, and you can see the market share has gone from in 2019 to somewhere around 16-17% to where it is today around 22-23%, and that's all due to fiber. In terms of total subscribers, it's been relatively flat, but fiber has made inroads in there, and the growth still is somewhat flat, but fiber continues to gain some market share. When you look at the telcos and the fibers, all the telcos, all the ILECs are making investments to some degree with fiber. Some of them have started a little bit later than others. I think everyone recognizes that if you're going to survive, you need to have a large fiber footprint. In terms of total living units that are passing each year, we're up to about 6.5 million on a 12-month rolling average. I would expect that that number probably will come down. And I'll touch upon a little bit why, at least with AT&T, and because they make up a large share of that build. This is from our analyst day back last March, and AT&T, and you kind of back up. We've gone through a lot of change over the last 3 or 4 years, anywhere from buying DirecTV to Warner Media and being a communications media company, to now becoming back to being a pure communications company, and our focus is on connectivity, fiber and broadband. And in 21, about 20% of our footprint was fiber. They're shooting to have 75% of it coverage by 2025, If you saw our earnings announcement yesterday, total coverage with fiber, we're at 24 million. That's both consumer as well as business. And we're shooting to have 30 million by the end of 2025. We also announced a joint venture with BlackRock on called Gigapower, where we're going to, through that joint venture, pass another 1.5 million homes with fiber. That's mostly a wholesale fiber business, and that's going to be in our non-footprints areas. The other aspect of and when we get into the evaluation, I'll touch upon it, is we have a large legacy footprint. You know, if you go back to 2000, we passed 60 million customer locations with fiber or with a copper network. We still have a lot of copper serving most of those 60 million homes, and we're still paying expenses on it. We're still having to maintain a lot of it. The goal here is to try to reduce our copper footprint by 2025 by 50%. And that certainly takes a lot of heavy lifting, particularly given the regulatory challenges there. The other aspect of it, and I mentioned the passing 30 million homes, and I think one of the speakers touched upon it earlier. We're at a point now with our fiber that we actually have more fiber locations we're passing than our DSL customer locations. However, when you look at the total broadband subscribers, going from 2019, we had roughly 13.9 million. Today, it's 13.9 million. We're just treading water. We're just switching them from the copper network where we're going to lose them to the fiber where we can retain them and potentially have some uplift on some better products. So from a valuation perspective, with our build, as of today, 24 million locations, about 80 to 85% of that is an overbuild situation. And we're putting fiber next to our copper network, we're running it out. The plan is, as pointed out in the previous slide, we're planning on trying to get out of a lot of that copper network by 2025. But until we can, we're having to operate two networks and maintain two networks and get through some of the regulatory challenges. In some states get COLA relief. A lot of states have already implemented COLA relief, but there's still 214 requirements. Areas where we have zero demand, then we can potentially get out of those areas, but it takes time to go through those hurdles. But until then, what we have on the top is a dual network. And you certainly wouldn't, from a valuation perspective, replace that network with that type of framework of two networks. What you would replace it with is the bottom, a full fiber network to serve those locations, particularly in the more dense areas. And so when you're looking at it from a valuation or an obsolescence perspective, there's certainly excess capital costs associated with that copper network. There's a ton of excess operating costs between electricity, the copper network. It takes energy to operate. There's still a lot of maintenance costs with that. There's a lot of hurdles with central office facilities. It's real difficult to go in and shut a central office facility down with a copper network running through it. And then certainly with fiber, there's better potential for higher ARPUs and revenues to be generated from it between the broadband products, and to the extent that you do have video, certainly video adds on to that. So I'll turn it over to John.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, there was supposed to be a different slide there.
John, thanks for that contribution. Yeah, appreciate it.
Good job.
That slide might be later. This might be an old version.
I'm just going to go through a couple things that are happening at Comcast and the industry as a whole. I won't touch too much on the specifics of the technology changes that Jeff went over and probably explained in way better detail than I ever would have been able to anyway. But a couple interesting things. This is from our network usage report from 2021. Unfortunately, the 2022 report is not quite out yet. But in 2021, 71% of our traffic was video. which probably isn't a surprise to anybody. And that's kind of hitting us from both sides here. As cord cutting continues to accelerate on the video side, all of that traffic now is coming on the broadband side, with the kind of the double hit, the loss of revenue on the video side, and then the increased capacity and network demands on the broadband side. And on the broadband side, as we've talked about all day, there's significant competitive pressure. So there isn't a whole lot of pricing power on the broadband side either. So we're really, operating in a really restrained place here. A couple other interesting things we've talked about: upload versus download, and how DOCSIS 4.0 we can get to symmetrical. Currently in our network, we're at close to 15-1 download versus upload, which again probably shouldn't surprise anybody. That did drop slightly during the heart of COVID with the work from home movement and everybody on Zoom and Teams calls all day. But that's kind of normalized now as we've gotten away from that. Even with people continuing to work from home, the download is still significantly higher. So as we've talked about, it's really a perception and a marketing problem. Where most people are actually using the products is on the downstream side. This is an illustration here of the DOCSIS 4.0 investment. Again, I won't touch on it too much. The full duplex DOCSIS enables that simultaneous upstream and downstream in the same bandwidth, and is really a software solution along with that. So that enables a much more efficient delivery of the broadband product. And then just a couple other fun little facts here. We're at 12 times the amount of connected devices on our network since 2018. That's everything, both outlets, mobile devices, and then a lot of it, I guess, is Internet of Things. Recently redid my kitchen, and now all of my kitchen appliances want to be connected to Wi-Fi. For what benefit, I'm not entirely sure, but that seems to be the way every single device is going now. Everything is a smart device. Everything needs to connect to Wi-Fi. A couple network investment milestones. We've hit over $20 billion of investment just in the past 4 or 5 years. That includes 50,000 new fiber route miles. We still, are only in the 30-ish% of our network is fiber. So we've gotten within 1,000 feet of most customers with fiber, but that last 1,000 feet to each customer still makes up the majority of our network. And as Gary mentioned, the OpEx on that portion of the network is significantly higher, with the amplifiers, the powering equipment, and all the failure points that are in that current part of the network. As part of the DOCSIS 4.0 upgrade, we will reach over 50 million homes with multi-gig symmetrical speeds by 2025. So that's currently rolling out today in a couple markets and is really ramping up the end of this year through 2025.
Before go on to John. Sure. So Comcast obviously doesn't face the same issue with running dual networks as AT&T does, but would you consider, in looking at what costs you have layered over the years, would you consider your network to be anywhere near optimized?
No, definitely not. As we continue to invest the fiber to get closer to the customers, doing node splits, and now doing, the upgraded digital nodes with the virtualized CMTSs, et cetera, we've still got that last 1,000+ feet with coax. So most of our fiber is really a same overlash type situation where, yes, you've got some kind of transport longer fiber runs that aren't duplicative, but most of the fiber is being overlashed where there's coax as well, because our entire CPE currently, it is somewhat forward compatible, but that's all all the customer connections are off of coax currently. So where you've got fiber, you've got coax too.
And really, there's no way that you can, seriously think you're getting to an appropriate valuation without consideration for an adjustment for that, right? I mean, it's,
Yeah.
How could you?
Totally agree.
Yeah.
And the $200 per home pass that's been publicly communicated, that's an additional investment, and that'll get us additional speeds and capacity in the network. However, it does nothing to fix those other issues that we have with the legacy network from a valuation perspective.
And we're the same way at Charter. We've publicly communicated that it'll be $100 per home passed. That seems aggressive, considering Comcast was announced twice that. And we're talking about 55 million homes passed. This was the slide when they initially passed it to me that we thought was going to be there. It's just it's a slide that came out of our investor presentation back in December, just talking about how cable continues to reinvent itself. It started off, just as cable TV and an antenna TV product, and then has evolved with the multi-channel cable systems into the upgrades that occurred in the 90s that brought in internet and broadband. Then we added landline voice in the 2000s, then gig internet and mobile in the teens, late teens, and now looking at a converged gigabit connectivity product in the 20s. And I'm not going to cover, it sounds like Jeff paid attention to that investor call, because almost all the slides that I had, he covered in the last session. But basically what Charter's doing over the next couple of years, between 23 and 25, is investing in the network and improving the network from where it's currently at. Jeff covered all this in much greater detail than I can. But this is what the network currently looks like. It's that 750, 860 megahertz network. And as we progress and pull pieces out of the network and add in new technology, the network will increase speeds both up and downstream through high-end splits. And then over time, over those 3 years, we'll ultimately end up with this fiber on demand, taking a lot of the amplifiers out of the network, improving the head-ends and the nodes, the hubs and nodes. And from a customer experience perspective, it'll be a much better experience compared to now with the speeds. But the whole idea, and I think, Steve, you've touched on this a little, is we're getting into your sandbox with the wireless, you're getting into our sandbox with the broadband, and ultimately at some point, one's going to probably be the superior product. And Steve, we're sorry, but it's ours.
Maybe, maybe not. And also Larry mentioned something earlier, technology is relentless. And there isn't some time that you're going to be ideal. That never happens. That otherwise history would have stopped then, right? So it's going to happen. And again, we've had all the report on where everybody's headed, but I think, and don't mean to put you on the spot, John, but if there's one or two things that you would say, okay, now, and we talked about, this has to be addressed in valuation as you're moving along, because you're never going to stop moving. And you're going to layer cost upon cost upon cost upon cost upon cost. So what are the things that need to be directly considered, and what are the appropriate ways to recognize this in deriving the value every single year?
Yeah, so one thing we've looked at, we do have all those legacy costs in the system already. The coax that was put in years ago and is definitely in the network. But then we're putting in fiber now, for instance, with the RDOF. And one way we're looking at it is looking at what would that replacement ideal scenario be, and that's that fiber to the prim model, the fiber to the home. But then we have to look at what we've actually put into the system and where that obsolescence is. And that's one way of looking at the value and what true fair market value should be, even though we have all those legacy costs that are in the system now.
Yeah, one thing we've seen, we like to look at a lot of metrics to see, what that replacement cost might be, from a greenfield perspective, as that's a good barometer of, how much the current network should be valued. And we've seen the replacement cost networks be up to 50% cheaper in some cases than our legacy costs with the existing network, and that's before any of the additional investment over the next couple of years. So I mean, it varies by area and cost structure, but it can be significant, and I think that really needs to be recognized in the in the valuation side.
It
And
really,
also you need to factor in
Please.
density.
yes,
Because
yes.
density, I mean, certainly plays into the valuation, whether it's Austin or it's Clover by Lubbock, right? What you would use, it plays into that.
Thinking, anytime you're doing this and you're looking at kind of a grid or for your adjustments, density, I know it's in yours, Christian, and that has to be one of the factors. I mean, I think, as said, I mean, I think anybody doing this, you got to look at what your implied percent good is, just based on total cost and assessment. You got to look at your density. You got to look at just that cost value on a per mile basis. All those things, and of course, the key to correlate all is going to be your density. Those variabilities in say value per sub per mile, then you have your density factor, and then you can really compare apples to apples, because in appraisal that's what you do. I mean, that's what you do. You're doing that in sales comparison approach. You're actually doing that income approach, and effectively, and you need to do it here and look to all those things, and that information is certainly available.
I mean, and just kind of put it in perspective, and I'll have Jim and Carl maybe correct me on the math, but let's say you're passing in an urban area, real dense, 100 homes per house, it's $1,000, so it's $2,000 per home connected. If you have a 50% penetration rate and you're getting $60 a month for broadband, 50% margin on that, that's $30. Times 12, that's $360. You can get a reasonable rate of return on that. If it's in an area that has low density, let's say 20 homes, and that costs now $5,000 per home passed, that $360, it's pretty hard to justify that investment. That's part of why I think Jim's going to talk about the broadband and some of the subsidies out there trying to bridge those gaps, but it does make for a challenging equation to see if you can bridge it and be able to make those investments in those areas.
And I think that's why Verizon's not continuing its investment because of that, because there is no return on investment.
Yeah, and this is just an illustration here of some of the things we've been talking about. Kind of the amount of times, particularly talking from the cable perspective, the amount of times we've invested and incrementally upgraded our network over the years, it leads to just layer upon layer of costs on the books. And we just wanted to illustrate that doesn't always equal value. This is the multiple roof replacement example. If you've replaced your roof 5 times over the life of your house, have you increased the value of your home? Obviously not, above and beyond having one new roof. So just something to keep in mind, and to get to value, I know we're all tasked with getting to value, and there's mass appraisal. It's a difficult thing, but you need to look at other things as well, such as obsolescence or shorter lives on some of the equipment, which is no longer going to remain in the network very long.
And about some of the equipment, I think we're going to see over the next few years a significant change in the CPE that's in the customer's home. The converter boxes, right now, Charter and Comcast are actually working on a joint venture for a single device, probably no bigger than a Roku, and that'll be the source rather than the converter box, the traditional DVR type converter box that will have multiple different services, whether it's Netflix or Prime or any of the other streaming services, along with the traditional cable through Comcast or Charter.
Yeah, and additionally, I wanted to point out, I think Jeff mentioned it, but the $100 or $200 per homes passed to upgrade to DOCSIS 4, that doesn't include the CPE costs, so it's another $75, $80, $100. So another additional costs. And then you've also got all of the electronics that are coming out of the network as well. I really think we should, collectively look at, the lives and the depreciation we're looking at on head-end equipment, nodes, and the other active equipment that is all has very close to end of its functional life. And these are, again, I think, kind of a summary of a lot of the issues that we're talking about here. The optimization of the network that's been built piecemeal over time, probably not the most optimal routing, overlashing, truck rolls, and maintenance, and the electronics nearing, end of life.
And along with the overlashing, for a company like Charter, made up of many legacy cable systems, built up over time through the late 90s, early 2000s, then the merger with Time Warner in 2016. It's just a non-optimal approach of how it's been built up over time, not how you would build it in a greenfield approach, and it's been piecemealed together to get it functional and working, but definitely not optimal.
And you could add inflation to this equation here.
There we go. Everybody has this memorized, right? Or in some cases, you don't want to hear anymore. But I think, yeah, you have to look at this and it's, well, it may not be practical, but I think these guys have indicated some ways in which that can be done in effect, and that's by considering the information about cost components and what the, again, you're talking about. So, well, okay, so you have to every year go and build out in a model what a new optimal network would be. And I think there are times that probably needs to be done, and that onus is on the taxpayer to do and provide that, and the taxpayers do. But certainly, without all that, I think adjustments can still be made, and still recognizing this principle in effect.
Any questions? Or where are the questions? I don't know if we want any from Jim. You're next. You talk next.
Yeah, maybe I'll have a question leaned into my stuff. No. With cable systems, part of your constraints on your capacity is the RF transmission of video. When does that transition out? Does that go out in DOCSIS 4? Do you still do RF video, or do you go to IP video at some point so that you free up all that capacity that you're just stuck on the RF side?
I think most of our video is switching to IP-based. It's either in progress or very shortly. I think it'll mostly be going away.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you look at the original, network as it was constructed, the 750, 860 system, the bulk of that network was taken up with all the video, right? And then switch over to HD and all the digital. But now you'll see everything, almost everything in the network be used up on the IP side.
We have questions from the
Okay.
Valerie. I've got them up there. Actually, Bill has one that's earlier on, but let's take care of these first. This is from Jim Dombrowski. How much dark fiber still exists out in the network, and do you think it will ever be used? If so, when? If not, why not? Is it misplaced, or is it a function of constant technological upgrades to the electronics that will keep dark fiber remaining as a stranded cost where it is currently placed?
Speaking from the Comcast perspective, we have actually next to no dark fiber. We have fiber that is not using the full capacity of that. However, most of our fiber was purpose-built and designed, wasn't built speculatively like some other investments that have been made over time. So from Comcast's perspective, there's not any significant amount.
Yeah, and also same way for Charter. There is that excess capacity that's not being used, but there's not like anything that's not lit or dark.
But, and that's the case for those two companies. However, where, Jim, what you identify where it does exist, I think it's actually the last part of your question there, is this fiber that technologies pass by, it's not the ideal location, that has been overbuilt, I guess, and that's completely different overbuild of a broadband network. That's the issue, and I don't know what anybody else think, but I can't imagine much of it really ever being lit.
Worth a buck, just for the record. $1.
There we go, and we even know how much it's worth now. It's worth now. Yep.
I thought it should be negative $300 million a year, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I've got another question from Anthony Kuteya, AT&T, Katea. AT&T, are the cable carriers still utilizing the first generation fiber optic cables put into service in the 1980s, or have you mostly replaced such in the last few decades to meet the new broadband speed needs?
Can you?
I'm not entirely sure on this one. I think much of the fiber has been upgraded from what's in the 80s. I'm not sure how much fiber we even had in the 80s. I would assume the majority of it is 20 years older or less.
Yeah, I mean, it became later. Yeah, I think if you could kind of think back and you look at how much upgrade cost you've seen, in your cost information and where you have come and overlash things like that. I think it can't help but be the case even with the fiber. Once you start getting older than 20 years, do you really? I mean, how much is there much relative contribution there at all with all you've done since?
I mean, when we bought Bell South, for example, there was some of that old fiber to the curb deployments that we went, but we had to go back in, and all that's been corrected.
Yeah.
So.
Jim asks, the other question is, what rate of penetration is needed for fiber to the home to break even out of every 100 units passed? Is it 40, 50, or some other percent? And do you see that changing as all going forward, lower or higher threshold? That's actually on the screen, too.
I don't have a specific answer to that, but I'm going to just reiterate that it's going to depend on the cost structure of where you're building. Density, the costs for labor, and the other variable expenses. And I think all of our companies are, actively modeling all of these areas currently as we're contemplating, bidding on all of the broadband dollars that are out there.
Anthony asks, from an assessing standpoint, how would you recommend the tax assessors measure the obsolescence for carriers like AT&T and VZ who are running dual networks, e.g. copper and fiber optic, on the same poles and in the same conduit, taking into consideration that the assets may still be in use nowhere near their full capacity, or that they are regulatory requirements needed to approve providers' relief from operating dual systems? That's, again, from Anthony Katea.
Take your shot, Gary.
Well, I can talk to him personally. You guys answer that one.
Yeah.
I think you'd first have to deduct any of the excess operating costs and make additional adjustments for the stranded investment, so to speak, or the excess investment in the network.
Yeah, and I would add, when you look at external obsolescence, regulatory issues is considered part of obsolescence. And so the fact that we have dual networks and it takes some time to work through to be able to retire networks, that is a form of obsolescence. There's certainly excess capital, and there's certainly excess operating costs associated with that.
That's what I was also going to add, the excess operating costs that you have just because of that. And even if you wanted to turn it off completely, you can't. There's reasons behind that.
Bill asks.
Well, now, and a third point on this thing, is we're not rate regulated, and so even with that asset base, we're not able to earn any rate of return on that investment. So.
Bill Kleinbecker asks, you now have originated content, parentheses news, close parentheses, but in large cities like Austin, that can be extended to other streamed content like UT Sports. That could add to demand for downstream bandwidth, including other streaming needs. Will that justify a move to duplexed PONS?
Yeah, I mean, I think what he's asking is just, the increased streaming as it continues to grow and specialized content. Of course, it's going to lead to increased demand constraints on the network, and that's what we've seen drive all of the demand increases in the network is the increase in video streaming. So I think that will continue to grow, particularly as customers continue to cut the cord on linear television subscriptions. Comcast, as an example, some of you may have seen earnings today. We lost another 400,000 video subs last quarter. And I think our broadband subs crossed over to be higher than video only 5 or 6 years ago. And as of today, we have double the amount of broadband subs as video. So as those continue to go offline in the future, that's going to put additional demand on the network.
And it's there. You mentioned sports, and some people might be thinking, okay, something like UT, and all that's there, but it's not as if you can just find any team you want, anytime you want, anywhere you want. But that's what customers are coming to expect. And I think sports is just one example. There's a lot more growth there, and I think it's a perfect example. But there are many others as well that it just seems observationally, it just seems like that's there, and it's going to grow, and that demand is going to just continue to growth on growth.
Yeah, I had a question for Larry, just out of curiosity. I mean, and I mentioned I thought that fiber is sort of technology proof, but I'm just curious. You think we'll ever get a point where wireless progresses enough to where it becomes a viable substitute for fiber?
That's the question I was asking Jeff is, at what point could you do broadband cord cutting going to wireless broadband until you run into capacity constraints from the wireless side? There's spectrum's a very limited resource. No matter how spectrally efficient you get, you are going to have that limitation. And I'm not really sure, given the intensity of our broadband usage, whether you could really do enough of a substitute to really endanger the investment in terrestrial solutions or wireline solutions. Comes to fiber. I just don't know if the capacity is there for it. But it's a good question.
Jim,
you need a mic.
he's coming around from the left.
Yeah, for all that Steve says, he relies on fiber. So wireless is not a substitute for fiber service. Wireless is an augmentation service upon wireless service. And what happens is that wireless service becomes a substitute for the drop or some portion of that fiber network. So it's not the entire fiber network, it's just what portion of that network becomes substitutable with that wireless technology.
Yeah, you made a good point there about the drop. I've done it for so long now that I just think of fiber being fiber to all the way to the premises, but it also includes fiber with a wireless drop, fiber with a coax drop even. It's as long as it's mostly fiber, it's fiber. The other.
Okay, I think we've. Go ahead, Steve, please.
I have a quick question off topic. What is a regional sports fee and what is a regional broadcast fee? I'm one of those dinosaurs.
Not sure I understand the question.
I'm a cable subscriber, right?
Yeah. What's a regional sports fee?
Paying those extra fees.
Yeah.
Oh, the fee.
There's
Okay.
fees for those.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
there are. Good. That's your point. Yes, there are.
You can thank your friendly local sports team
Yeah.
owner for,
If-
charging a lot of money for the rights to broadcast it. So,
Okay.
those are passed along
If
to the customers, perhaps.
You are a dinosaur like some of us, and you do that, your cable bill is over $300 a month.
You want to watch it, you just don't want to pay for it.
I want a flat.
We have two online questions.
Okay, these will be our last two.
Are the cable carriers still utilizing the first generation fiber optic cables put into service in the 19? Oh, have I already asked that? Is a goal of fiber to a family member in a busy home cost effective? Compare to a cable which would have less traffic as the migration from cable to fiber becomes economical.
I think the first question would depend whether it's cost effective or not. Certainly from the company's perspective.
Yeah, I think it certainly can be and is in some places, right?
Yeah.
But it's not going to be in every instance.
And I know there's been different deals like with AT&T, but you can go from 1 gig to 3 gig to 5 gig at no additional cost. You know, and so. I'm sorry. So what I said is certainly like with AT&T, there's opportunities to go from a 1 gig to a 3 gig to a 5 gig type service at no additional cost in certain markets. So I think it kind of depends.
Okay, hey, thank you everyone. Gary, John, Christian, thank you so much. You guys, thank you.